Dernhelm, son of Isangrim, aka Marcus Clodius Ballista, aka Oathbreaker, aka Warrior of Rome, is a character created by the classicist, Roman military historian and novelist Harry Sidebottom. He's the protagonist of a series of novels, starting with Fire in the East, published in 2008. Ballista is one of my favourite fictional characters, although some aspects of his story are inspired by an obscure 3rd century historical figure, also known as Ballista, or sometimes Callistus. In this video, we'll take a look at Sidebottom's Ballista, the early years of this fictional character, and his historical context. Welcome to Ancient Classics. Sidebottom's Ballista novels are set across the Roman Empire in the middle of the 3rd century, a transitional, tumultuous period standing between, on the one hand, the glorious golden age of the late Republic and early Empire, and on the other, the establishment of a second capital at Byzantium and the adoption of Christianity by Constantine, and all that followed as late antiquity passed into the medieval era. In his notes to the original Ballista novel, Sidebottom writes, "When I told my colleague Bert Smith, the Lincoln Professor of Classical Archaeology at the University of Oxford, that I was writing a series of novels set in the second half of the 3rd century AD, he congratulated me on picking a period about which so little is known for sure that no one could prove me wrong." Now, I must admit I know next to nothing about the period, and what I do know is thanks almost entirely to Dr. Sidebottom's rich and evocative dramatization. Relatively few scenes across the novels, however, are set in Rome itself, or even in the Italian heartlands of the empire. Rather, Ballista's adventures take him to the peripheries and beyond. We encounter the states, tribes, and peoples who in the decades and centuries to follow would play an increasingly significant role in the fate and the eventual fall of the Western Roman Empire. The Persian Sassanids, the Goths, the Alemanni, the Heruli, and many others. But Rome's relationship with barbarians, and especially the Germanic tribes, stretched back much further into the past than the 3rd century. And indeed, the warrior of Rome, Ballista himself, is a barbarian. Ballista, the fictional character that is, was born sometime around 220 AD as Dernhelm, the son of Isangrim, chieftain of the Himlings, a fictional Germanic tribe, but more specifically, an Angel tribe. As a young teen, Dernhelm is sent to Rome as a political hostage for his father's good behaviour. That would have been a terrifying experience for a young lad, but Dernhelm is accompanied by his father's Caledonian slave, Callistus. Many years later, though before the events of the first novel, the duo will be joined by a third man, Maximinus, a Hibernian warrior turned war captive turned gladiator turned bodyguard, meaning that the core trio of the earlier novels are an Angel, a Hibernian, and a Caledonian, i.e. the prototypical Englishman, Irishman, and Scotsman. Sidebottom apparently is heavily influenced by Bernard Cornwell's Sharp novels, which centre around the English Sharp and his Scottish and Irish pals. Now, I've not read any of the Sharp novels, so I don't know, but apparently the influence is unmistakable. At Rome, Dernhelm is raised and educated alongside other highborn hostages and young Roman aristocrats, including the future Emperor Gallienus, and he becomes, as far as it is possible for a boy in his position, a member of the Roman elite, adopting the name Marcus Clodius Ballista, his cognomen, Ballista, coming from his fascination with heavy artillery. Then Ballista is roped into a conspiracy and assassinates the usurper emperor Maximinus Thrax. That scene, a historical event which occurred in 238 AD, comprises the prologue of the first book. A prologue which has an important role in setting up both the character of Ballista and the historical backdrop of the entire series. The usurpation and subsequent assassination of Maximinus Thrax were key early events in the so-called 3rd century crisis, a period of constitutional and military turmoil during which the Roman Empire was beset by external and internal conflicts and threats. To quote Drinkwater, "The 50 years following the death of Severus Alexander were among the most disruptive ever experienced by the Roman Empire, a period of crisis which began in 236, reached its peak around 260, and then gradually yielded to the ministrations of a series of reforming emperors ending with Diocletian. The outstanding characteristic of this crisis was war, both civil and foreign. It saw at least 51 individuals who legitimately or illegitimately received the title of Roman Emperor, and during it, imperial territory frequently fell victim to the depredations of Franks, Alemanni, Goths, and Persians. The emperor, Severus Alexander, was murdered in 235 on the orders of Maximinus Thrax, who then seized power. By 238, Maximinus's rule was being challenged on numerous fronts, not least through the election of Marcus Clodius Pupienus Maximus and Decimus Caelius Calvinus Balbinus as emperors. Maximinus led his army towards Rome to deal with the threat. En route, his army became embroiled in the siege of Aquileia, during which the demoralized army mutinied and killed Maximinus. In Sidebottom's novel, it is the young Ballista who is coerced by his officers into assassinating Maximinus in his tent. The actual assassin or assassins are unknown. That scene and the preceding horrors of the siege of Aquileia make for a thrilling prologue and set up the novel's series as themes of war and political turmoil. But the event is also a foundational moment for our young fictional hero. Ballista is presented throughout the novels as a conscientious man driven by duty and honour. That he was coerced at such a young age into betraying his military oath of allegiance to his commanding emperor leaves Ballista with a psychic trauma. With that act of assassination, Ballista becomes the Oathbreaker, and throughout his adult life, Ballista is visited in his nightmares by the figure of Maximinus morphing into the all-father god Woden, uttering the words, "See you in Aquileia." That's Ballista's curse. Notwithstanding his assumed Romanitas, it is the god of his childhood, Woden, that is his inner voice of guilt. Whilst the ruling classes of Rome continually plot and fight against each other, Ballista can never forgive himself for the original sin of betrayal. He is always the Oathbreaker. We see this conflict between Ballista's barbarian or Germanic inner self and the veneer of Romanitas throughout his life, and it is his aberrations from his inner culturally inherited moral code that torture him the most. That's partly why, to me, Ballista is such a compelling character. He is an ideal masculine hero of the kind that is too often sidelined in popular culture today. He's brave, courageous, driven by a sense of honor and duty, but he is flawed and makes mistakes, some under duress, others through momentary weakness, mistakes which expose the tensions of his soul and upbringing, his Anglo roots, and his Roman education and role. But there's much more to Ballista's identity as a Romanized Anglo. Not only does it underpin his characterization and to some extent drives the plot of the novels, but it is also an intentional historical foreshadowing on Sidebottom's part of the increasingly significant role played by Romanized Germanic peoples within the Roman world. Later centuries will see Rome's increasing reliance on Germanic auxiliaries and men with Gothic, Vandal, and other Germanic roots, such as Stilicho, who will assume some of the highest positions of state by the end of the 4th century. Not to mention, of course, the significant role played in the 5th century in Rome and its environs by the likes of Alaric, Odoacer, and Theodoric. After the prologue, the first novel picks up nearly 20 years later in 255, and we meet the mature Ballista as he is about to set off for the eastern fictional city of Arete at the orders of the Emperor Valerianus. Ballista by now is married to the beautiful, proud Roman aristocrat Julia, and he has a son, Isangrim, and another, Dernhelm, on the way. So, Ballista is sent to defend Arete against the Sassanid Persian army. The Siege of Arete, incidentally, provides a narrative context in which Sidebottom, much of whose academic work has focused on Roman warfare, can dramatize the conventions and anecdotes of Greco-Roman siegecraft. Many scenes in the first book are lifted from or inspired by a counter-siege treatise by the 4th century BCE writer Aeneas Tacticus. The city of Arete falls, but Ballista manages to escape, and it becomes clear that the defense of Arete was nothing but a delaying tactic, and Ballista had been sent by Valerianus in the full knowledge that he would probably die there. The second book in the series, King of Kings, ends with a momentous historical event, one which sets up the plot of the third book, Lion of the Sun, Of all the Ballista books, The Lion of the Sun, 2010, is my favourite. It's also the book in which Sidebottom integrates the historical or pseudo-historical Ballista with the story of his fictional namesake. Now this video is drawing to a close and some of you might be thinking, where the hell are the primary texts? Well, don't worry, in the next video we'll more than overcompensate for the lack of ancient texts in this video, and we'll take a look at the ancient and not so ancient sources of the historical Ballista, and I mean all of them, and they're crazy, from Sassanid imperial inscriptions to mystical prophecies to medieval Byzantine chronicles and more. So, like and subscribe, and we'll be back soon.